you have to look at fungi. Fungi are primary decomposers. That means they can only live on decaying life. That suggests to me that they are late evolving, or at least not early evolving. Mushrooms are very soft-bodied, and so are all fungi. There is no record, no fossil record of a mushroom older than 40 million years. Well, that's a tiny fraction of the time life has been on the Earth. Now, when I asked a paleontologist about this, he said, well, they're soft-bodied and they don't fossilize easily. But hey, we have flatworms from the gunflint chert of South Africa. They're 4.3 billion years old. If they left a trace in the fossil record, you'd think there would be more of a trace of mushrooms. If you decondition your presuppositions and just look at the mushroom, it looks to me, number one, as though it is capable of surviving an extraterrestrial environment. In other words, if you have mushroom spores and you want to store them for long-term longevity, you seek an environment as much like outer space as you can find. You store them in liquid nitrogen at minus 200 degrees, and they will last virtually forever. If you look at the color of Stropharia cubensis spores, that's in the brown-gilled mushroom family, the spores are deep purple, almost black. That's the color you would paint a spacecraft if you wanted to absorb long wave radiation. If you look at the spore, what is it? It's a packet of crystallized DNA. A single mature Stropharia cubensis mushroom, when it's sporulating, will shed up to 3 million spores a minute for up to 2 weeks. 3 million spores a minute for 2 weeks. And these things are microscopic, so small that the perturbations and agitation of air molecules, which are called Brownian motion, can actually percolate these things into the outer atmosphere, where then energetic cosmic events can actually detach them from the terrestrial medium, and they slowly, like planetary dandruff or something, drift off into space. Well, I always, it seems so obvious to me, maybe it's because I live in Hawaii, but the most predictable major revolution in biology that you can imagine is, of course, within a few years it will be realized that the Earth is an island. That's all. That the biota that is present here, much of it probably drifted in cosmic debris. When stars go supernova, planets are destroyed. It's a cliche of cosmic consciousness to say, the atoms in your body were once in the hearts of distant stars. Well, if that's true, then some of the atoms in your body were once in a part of distant planets. And some vanishingly small fraction may have been part of the biota of extraterrestrial ecosystems. The other thing about the mushroom that's very suggestive to me is it appears to be, or there is a place, a perspective from which you can look at it, that it appears to be not an organism but an artifact. It is incredibly well designed at a very high level of design criteria. For example, on this planet, one of the most advanced ethical systems we've been able to evolve is Buddhism, which teaches vegetarianism. If a Buddhist could design their own genome, they would become a fungus, because a fungus is a primary decomposer. It's the only karmaless place in the entire food chain. There is no karma for the fungi. They don't destroy any life whatsoever. So here you have this thing designed to traverse extraterrestrial space, occupying a carmeless niche in the ecosystem, and when complexed with a mammalian nervous system, a galactarian archive of historical data becomes accessible. We have only known about DNA since 1950, less than 50 years, and we're already confidently talking about completely redesigning the human genome and so forth and so on. Well, if we pursue along these lines for 500 years, we will look the way we want to look. And, trivially, we may all want to be Keanu Reeves or something, but once the cultural agenda cuts in, if, say, Buddhism took over in the presence of an advanced molecular genetics, then we could design ourselves into a carmeless niche in the universe. I wish that we could bring, I don't know who it is, but the content of the mushroom experience, which was what launched your question, is so evidently alien and non-human and self-referential to a world we don't know that, to me, it would require a commission and several years of study to decide that this thing is not an extraterrestrial. Our notions of extraterrestrials to this point have been incredibly self-reflexive. Once you have fully in grasp the size of the universe and the amount of time that is available, then the idea that someone would come in a metal ship with an interest in your gross industrial output and a desire to cure cancer is absolutely preposterous. That's such a culture-bound notion. It's like expecting them to arrive with a load of pizzas ready for delivery. The trick is going to be to recognize the extraterrestrial. The very notion alien means unfamiliar. So it's not going to be like we think it is. The real task will be to recognize it. And we have discovered, after only 1,000 years, that toxic metal-based technologies are fatal. And we have pushed our entire planet into planetary crisis by coming to this realization rather late in the game. If long-term survival is the name of the game for intelligent life in the universe, then the way we're doing it is not the way to do it. It's going to have to be non-polluting, biologically based, molecularly based, so forth and so on. And as you run down the list, the mushroom begins to look more and more like the real thing. And then, of course, the content of the experience is so different from other psychedelics, and so other-oriented that I am puzzled that we've been at this now nearly 30 years and we still don't have a consensus. I don't know what it is. Is it that when you take the mushroom you lose all ability to then operate in the world of straight judgments and understanding? It's very puzzling, but I think probably the biota of the Earth is riddled with extraterrestrial genes, if not organisms, and possibly intelligences. But they're not interested in your fetal tissue or putting implants in you or taking you up and slicing you up in very large-scale surgical wards. I find all that paranoid and pathological. I can talk about that if you want, but it's not really our subject.
I had an experience earlier this summer, which I probably shouldn't tell, but I will, that is an example of how it gets weird. A friend of mine moved to London and left me his library for unspecified amounts of time to keep. A very bizarre library, mostly Platonic stuff, a lot of magic, a lot of that sort of thing. And so we built a book loft for it, and our house is wedge-shaped, and so this book loft is way up at the top of the house. And I was alone in the house, and I took 7 dried grams, and I was sitting there, and it was just beginning to come on. I was in the show what you know thing phase, and it was beginning to show what it knew, and there was this disrupted area of space in front of me where it was like rotating, and I was looking into it and talking it up. And I was actually speaking. At first I was just speaking in my mind. Then I began speaking aloud, and I was saying, "You are beautiful thing. You are beautiful." And suddenly things changed, and it became very cold, and meaning the temperature fell suddenly. And the dog next door, who never howls, howled. And the cat, which was down below me, I was up in this loft looking down at our bed. The cat was on the bed. The cat flared out and made this really weird noise. And I just, I stopped what I was doing and projected my mind into this situation. And at that moment, I heard this sound, which was like, and then something settled onto the roof, sufficient to make the 6 by 14-inch beam creak in. Just went, and I was floored. And I just sat for a minute, and I was not frightened. In fact, my emotion was hard to get back to, but I wasn't frightened. But just at that moment, this thing was really coming on, and really visually peculiar, and it seemed like the two things were independent. The trip was getting stronger and stronger, but a 10-ton something had landed on the roof beam of my house. So I just sat with it for about 30 seconds, and then this thought or voice came, and it was, this thing has come because of something I'm doing, and that means that I can get rid of it. So I just turned like this up toward the roof and projected this thought very strongly, which was, "Begone, I am in conversation with an elder." And this thing went, "Woo!" And there was a long pause, 10 seconds or so, and then whatever it was, it lifted off the roof and went away. I explored the red sandstone bluffs yesterday and violated my own rule and actually did take a little psilocybin, just a tiny bit, just to help me sort of understand the landscape. And since today we're going to talk about ecology, it was sort of, I figured, part of the business end of things to do that. The reason I went to the effort to get the aerial photograph of Rustler's Valley up so you could see it was simply because on my very light mushroom trip yesterday, I went down the face of the bluff and then up onto the bluff, and then I just sat there, and I had no real expectation. I mean, I was roughly interested in the botany, and then I just sat there and smoked a bomber and sort of considered the situation, and several thoughts came to me of a somewhat surprising to me, and it was about the land. And I've been puzzled ever since I've gotten here, because this whole journey has had a kind of funny personal element in it, in that this place is more like where I grew up than any place I've ever been. And I keep telling myself it's not so, that I'm not
paying enough attention, and that there is nothing more irritating than the tourist who carries with him always the assumption of his home. But on the other hand, my relationship to the place where I grew up was not casual. I was a rock hunter, a fossil hunter. I spent a lot of time alone in the sandstone country, looking at it from a distance like this, you know, and picking at it and climbing around. And I can't shake the impression that I'm within 50 miles of where I was born. And if any of you ever have the opportunity, go to western Colorado, to places like Montrose, Delta, Delta County, Pitkin County. It's this to a T. It's the land that is the same. Of course, the plants are totally different. And I concentrated yesterday a lot on looking at the identifiably exotic South African flora, which I'm sure you all take for granted, but things like the cabbage tree and the Pelospelus and the Caryodopsis, the little Caryodopsis plants up on the rocks and all of that. Very interesting. But then I had a sort of a hallucination about the place, or an understanding, and that's why I brought the map in. And this is an aerial photograph of the general area. And this is the valley. The house and all the complex and the buildings and everything is here. And the big stone bluff behind us is this thing. And I don't, maybe you were aware, but maybe you weren't all aware of how thin it is. How it's just a knife of stone. It's not a mountain range that begins behind us. It's a knife of stone that is quite as clear on the other side as it is on this side. Because we hiked up and looked over, and there's more cultivation and so forth and so on. So I was thinking about how this is roughly a round valley, an enclosed valley. And valleys like that are always gather energy. Just, it's like a trivial observation. They gather energy. The Kathmandu Valley is such a valley, a round valley. The Valley of the Sibundoy in Colombia that Schultes called the site of the most highly evolved narcotic consciousness on Earth. He was speaking of the Brugmansia shaman, is a valley very similar to this, the Covelo Valley in Northern California. Anyway, not to put too fine a point on it, but my impression of this thing yesterday very strongly was that it's alive, and it's a beast. It's specifically and very obviously a dragon. And it guards this valley, and there's a very strong sense of its personality and intelligence. And I wonder if the local people haven't always perceived it that way. Certainly in Australia, it would have that kind of a character. So, you know, that was just a couple of grams of mushrooms, no purpose, and walking around, and suddenly there was this whole new dimension to things, and this gives it very clearly. This is another whole new dimension to things, to look down on things. This is the shaman's eye view of Rustler's Valley, and the whole thing is clearly under the protection of this thing. And I'm sure in the late afternoon this must photograph very clearly from orbit, because it would throw a long extended shadow. So anyway, that's about as woo-woo as I'll get. It was a personal observation. I felt this thing very strongly. Beginner's luck. So where we were, and let us continue. The mushroom said to me once, nature loves courage. Nature loves courage. And I said, what's the payoff on that? And it said, it shows you that it loves courage because it will remove obstacles. You make the commitment And nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done. It's done by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering that it's a feather bed. And there's no other way to do it. This is why I have always taken the position that as modern people, we can't go out and set armies marching or launch religions, and who would want to anyhow. But to the people who say adventure has fled, it's all humdrum, I just know, that they have forgotten the 5 grams of psilocybin sitting in their refrigerator. I mean, Magellan may have had excitement rounding the Horn, but you in your living room later tonight can put him in the shade if you have the courage to do the things that are necessary to do. And we know what they are. And of course, the first thing to do is to tell society to fuck off, because they don't know what's going on.
It changes for me all the time. I mean, I don't have a point of view, and my primary job is not public speaking or writing, but exploring. When I first started taking mushrooms and throughout the 70s, when we wrote the Mushroom Grower's Guide, I held several opinions, but my most strongly held opinion was it actually is an extraterrestrial. Just no shit, flat out, it is an extraterrestrial. And what's surprising to me is that a single mushroom trip of a certain sort could probably put me right back there again. Getting it worked down to Gaia or the overmind of the species is a kind of process of coming down from the real assimilatable context of the experience. It's like an extraterrestrial. I would certainly say this, if extraterrestrials appeared over Washington and Moscow tomorrow, it wouldn't make this any less mysterious or puzzling. In fact, the extraterrestrials might turn out to be mundane. This is not. How it speaks, this is the most astonishing thing for me to get used to. I mean, the visual hallucinations, somehow I can work it around that these are floods of imagery set off from deep structures of the brain and dumping of memory banks, but that it can just address you in real time and say, Terence, and then proceed to blow my mind. And now several things may be happening here. The only time when we have the experience of focusing on an incoming message, decoding it in real time, and responding to it immediately is when we have a conversation with someone. So if you find yourself responding to a message in real time, your brain automatically thinks you're having a conversation, saying, if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it must be a duck. So here I am listening and responding to someone speaking to me in English. Therefore, this must be a conversation. A slightly different argument that would see the mushroom as extraterrestrial is look at its style, for want of a better word. I mean, what is a mushroom? First of all, they reproduce by spores. Spores are the most economical biological unit imaginable. They can survive the radiation levels of interstellar space. They can survive for eons under conditions very close to those encountered in deep space. The mushroom spore falls into an ecosystem, immediately undergoes cell division. A fine thread-like network full of neurotransmitters begins to spread itself through the soil. It's very closely analogous to the neural network of a higher animal, including a human being. Now, we're accustomed to thinking that an extraterrestrial would bear the imprint of the evolutionary situation in which it came to be. In other words, if it evolved on a low-gravity planet, it will be tall and thin. If it evolved in a methane atmosphere, it will have an exotic body chemistry and so forth. But that's because we ourselves have possessed the knowledge of how DNA works for only about 40 years. It's reasonable to assume, I think, that if an intelligent species gets 1,000 years of study of DNA, that they can design themselves to be however they care to be. And in fact, if you think of the mushroom from that point of view, I think that we might choose that kind of an adaptation if we could have any form we wanted, because it's very non-invasive, very humbly insinuates itself into a situation and grows essentially on waste material in the soil. Yet when it sporulates, it can actually cross the boundary of outer space. And, great economy, great artistry, tremendous Zen-like aesthetics seem expressed in the mushroom. Psilocybin can be contrasted to any compound. It's different from all other compounds, including all other psychedelics. Psilocybin is very interesting and should be studied more deeply because it does things that are quite miraculous, that are very close to the surface. In other words, ordinary scientific methods of research, I think, could get at some of this. The first thing that is astonishing about psilocybin is that of all the psychedelics, of all the psychedelics, with the possible exception of DMT, which is a whole special case, psilocybin is the most easily capable of generating visions. And that fascinated me. I took a lot of LSD, and I was really hyped for LSD. I had read, I was waiting, I was fully informed and prepared by the time I got to my first LSD trip, and I was somewhat puzzled by it. It did completely take me apart, and I thought many strange things and had many insights, but I had thought that it would be like the Havelock Ellis description, the ruined cities dripping with jewels, the vast jungles, the strange machinery, all that. Later I discovered that by smoking good Bombay black hash on LSD, you can sort of coax that into existence. But an easier thing is psilocybin. Psilocybin just causes you to hallucinate furiously. And I don't understand how people can take this so casually. I mean, maybe we need to talk about the taxonomy of hallucination. When I say hallucination, I'm not talking about the walls breathing or something like that. I'm not even talking about those little things that look like fans
that go that are on that cover everything like wallpaper, when you open your eyes. I mean, those are hallucinations of some sort. I think they're called hypnagogia or eidetic phosphenes or something, but that's all in the visual pathway. That's about the eye. What I'm interested in at that point is not the eye, but the mind. And on psilocybin, my God, red velvet draperies are raised to an enormous organ tone, and then you just sail off into the most grandiose and extravagant architectonic unfoldment. I mean, there are no words for it. You don't know whether you're in a cyber remake of Chartres Cathedral, or you're inside somebody's television set, or you're walking around inside some kind of organism from Arcturus, or what is going on. And after a good psilocybin trip, your eyes are like bugging out of your head. I mean, it's like going to Upper Madison Avenue with money in your pocket. You have just been looking and looking and looking for hours and hours. And this stuff, before I got, or as I was getting into all this, my interest was Jungian psychology and art history. The fields which set you up for being able to recognize motifs, trace them through time, and understand how the various art movements of whatever centuries you're looking at fit together, and plus a deep faith in the archetypal foundations of human imagery and so forth. None of that was there. It was, as I said, a Niagara of alien beauty. It was beyond anticipating. It was that I, Joe Nobody, in an hour, seemed to be seeing more art of higher quality than the human family had produced in the last 1,000 years. And for me, it was, first of all, an absolute aesthetic ecstasy to see that much stuff, to hit the main frame, and then say, oh, I see, so this is what they're talking about, not all that babbling about looking at the folds of your trousers, and, but this is something. I mean, this is civilization-shattering stuff. I don't see how they keep the lid on it. And I still don't see how they keep the lid on it. However, that, it turns out, is not the most interesting, or, well, it may be the most interesting. It is not the most unique feature of psilocybin. Without doubt, in my mind, the most unique feature of psilocybin is that it speaks. It speaks in your native tongue. And that is absolutely confounding to the rational mind. I mean, that's what makes a believer out of most skeptics. Because, drugs, of course, you can imagine that a drug would mess with your mind and you would see strange things. That doesn't seem too over the top. But that you could take a drug that would drop a heavy hand on your shoulder and say, my friend, there are a few things you need to understand. Number one. Number two. Meanwhile, you're bursting into tears, you're reacting furiously because it's right. It's wiser than you could have possibly imagined, and it knows you better than you know yourself. And it's not wasting time. It's cutting to the chase. And this is astonishing to me. Who's in there? Who's in there? Is it the mushroom? Is it just straightforwardly that this thing growing on a cow pie in the pasture somehow has the capacity to unfold itself in my mind and lecture me on quantum physics, art history, the history of the galaxy, the destiny of the species, or what is going on there exactly? When someone tells you stuff you've never heard before, as fast as you can take it in, the only mode we know for that is conversation. And so you must assume you're having a conversation with someone at that point. And the information is, so puzzling. I mean, I believe that on a good psilocybin trip, you not only see things no one has ever seen before, but what you're seeing, no one will ever see again. That's how big it is in there. It is beyond the ken of the human imagination. Why is it like that? Well, that's a very interesting question. Rupert says, I mean, this is just a stab at it, that these molecules not only give trips, they record them. And when you take a substance that has been in use by human beings for 500,000 years, let's say, you walk into the largest database on the planet of dreams, of hopes, of aesthetic insights, not only the human world, but all the other worlds that the mushroom claims to have flourished in, because it is not a terrestrial organism. It's engineered for deep space. It can percolate between the stars. In the course of 1,000,000 years, at sublight speed, it could percolate across the galaxy. And 1,000,000 years is a tiny fraction of the time that it may have been in existence. The miracle is that it will have anything to do with us, that it is a being so enlightened, so unperturbed, that it will actually stop whatever it's doing and talk to you. And you have the feeling when you're dealing with it, it's totally claiming all of your attention, but you have the feeling that it is something much more like the Bell, the ITT International Phone Net or something, that many of these conversations are going on. And it will answer any question you can ask. The bigger you can frame it, the easier it is for it to answer it. And so it shows you, the rise and fall of worlds, species, and civilizations. Galaxies like grains of sand. I mean, it says, been there, done that. It's all here. And so I think that the Gaian mind produces these things, and that they are like pheromones. They are information-bearing chemicals. And it's a great mystery. It is the mystery. I have scoured this planet, done yoga, done this, done that, scratched pentacles in sand, made monstrous offerings at crossroads under the dark of a scorpionic moon, done it, been there, all that stuff. Nothing works. It's all horseshit. Nothing works except this. And this works, not a little, not 50%, but 1,000%. It's like the thing that you have been most trained to accept doesn't exist. It does exist. They were wrong. They lied to you for some weird reason. This is the secret which is not supposed to be told. And why I can tell it, I'm not sure. Nobody ever came to me and said, you mustn't. You're part of the brotherhood. You're an initiate. You must keep silent. Nobody ever said that to me. And I've never been initiated by anybody particularly. I learned this stuff by reading the Boston Museum botanical leaflets and then, putting tummy on the line. And it's a secret which dwarfs the enterprise of human history. And all that is required for you to be a part of it is a simple act of courage. Nobody goes to the ashram at 9 o'clock in the morning with their knees knocking in terror and dread at what they know is about to sweep over them. That's because
Yoga doesn't do that. Nothing puts you on the line like this does, because this is what you say you want. You know, it's easy to be on the spiritual path. You know, you just try one screwy thing after another and go forward. But when you arrive at this level, the name of the game changes. You sought the answer, you got it. Now what are you going to do with it? It's terrifying to me. I have no doubt that if I wanted to be the monk on Cold Mountain and go up into the mist and chop wood, and every once in a while the village people every year or two would say, oh yes, he's still up there, we glimpsed him naked in the snow, he lives in a cave. I could do that. But the price you pay when you finally find the tool of ultimate transcendence is that you will become incomprehensible to your fellow human beings, because they are not where you are. They are caught up in the idols of the tribe. They live in the anthill. They're worrying about, the oil leaks in their Jaguar. But it's a different thing. All other spiritual disciplines drive with the accelerator to the floor. You know, that's how you do it. When you come to psychedelics, suddenly there arises a great interest in locating the brakes. The brakes become all important, because you can now proceed at whatever rate you wish. It's no longer what Baba says or when the next workshop by Dr. So-and-so is held. It's now you have been given the power to move as far and as fast into this dimension as you want. And the joys are absolutely real, and so are the risks. We don't know what the limits of the human mind are. We don't know how much you can gaze upon and still, play any role in the social community. I mean, I'm a graduate of the H.P. Lovecraft school of this stuff. You know, there are some truths too bizarre for the mind to even brush against. And I've had that feeling with the mushroom. I mean, sometimes because we have dialogues, Hasidic, great raving Hasidic dialogues. And one of the things I have said to it at times is, show me yourself. Show me what you are, not for the talking monkeys. Show me what you are for yourself. And it's terrifying. I mean, the temperature drops about 15 degrees in about 15 seconds, and there's a low organ tone, and black draperies begin to rise, and after about 2 minutes of this, you just say, that's enough, thank you, of what you are for yourself. Let's go back to the dancing mice, the cheerful Paisleys, my relationship, and what we think about human history, but no more, because it is beyond comprehension. It's the real thing, folks. What all these people were talking about on the mountains, in the cave. And the strange thing is, it's among us. It's completely among us. And can be pursued by anybody, by any free-thinking human being. And I don't ultimately know what it means. Out of it, it's given me, I believe, a complete map of human history. That's the equivalent of trading a knife and a can of sardines to a starving Witoto in some baboon asshole outpost on a river. It meant nothing to it to give me a complete map of human history and a new vision of higher mathematics. They've got trade goods like that lined up from here to Hosanna. And so it's just all about, what you are willing to ask for. I don't know what it means. I don't believe in believing. I don't believe in drawing conclusions. But I do believe that life is a staggering opportunity for adventure. I mean, people who are complaining that things are too dull haven't the faintest notion of how weird it can get in a hurry if that's what you're interested in.